All right, thank you so much for staying with us. President Bola Tinubu on Friday presented a 58.18 trillion naira 2026 appropriation bill to a joint session of the National Assembly, vowing that 2026 will mark a decisive shift towards stronger discipline in budget execution and results-driven governance. President Tinubu said the budget titled Budget of Consolidation, Renewed Resilience and Shared Prosperity is designed to consolidate recent economic reforms and translate stabilizing macroeconomic indicators into improved living standards for Nigerians. President announced the end to long-standing practice of running multiple budgets in the country. He said the era of overlapping budgets, abandoned projects, inherited obligations, and perpetual rollovers must come to an end if Nigeria is to achieve fiscal discipline and sustainable development. He said the practice of avoiding abandoned projects, piling up contractual obligations, and running multiple budgets on a single inflow has continued to undermine effective governance and economic planning. My guest is no other person than Mr. Oluseun Onigbinde, his co-founder, director, also at Budget. We'll be having this conversation from now to the end of the show because it's really another very important one. Mr. Onigbinde, thank you so much. It's good to see you, and Merry Christmas to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. Thanks so much. Thanks so much
Okay, I think the president is listening. I will say that. You know, he talked about multiple budgets and talking about overlapping budgets and all of that. And this is something that you've talked about for so long. At a time we're running 2 to 3 budgets at a particular time. President is saying, no, that's not going to continue now. What do you make of that speech? And of course, the assumptions and projections of that document?
I mean, I looked at that document. I mean, we don't have the full details of the proposed budget. We expect that by now the details of the 2026 proposed budget would have been uploaded on the portal of the Budget Office of the Federation, but we don't have that. If we look at the speech of the president, there were a few things that stood out. Number one is that there's a bit of step back in terms of revenue projections. Let's not forget in 2025, the budget revenue projections were 40 trillion naira. Now we have a 34 trillion naira budget revenue projection. So a step back from that. It doesn't still mean that it's as realistic as it should be, but at least they are beginning to realize that some of the previous assumptions in the past were not just realistic. The other part also you would notice is the deficits. We are trying to do a budget of 54.47 trillion or 46 trillion, and you also want to do a revenue of 34.33 trillion, means that you have a deficit of around 23 trillion naira. 23 trillion naira deficit is a lot. If you compare the deficit to the revenue, you're putting around 70%. So, which means for any amount, it's just too much. The deficit size is just too much. And I begin to get worried because deficits also have debt service implication in future term. And if you look at our numbers, our debt servicing cost has moved from 8.55 trillion in 2023 to 12 trillion naira in 2024. And now we're going to possibly hit around 15 trillion in 2025, and we're budget around 15.52 trillion in 2026. So the size of the deficit worries me. But when you look at it from an angle that they begin to realize that running multiple budgets is something they have to stop, because this anomaly is not acceptable in any direction. And the president made the point that this is the end. They will ask for a bit of indulgence till March 2026, and from there they will now start the process of focusing on the 2026 budget. It's a budget that reveals the weaknesses of the Nigerian fiscal space, and it just shows that our revenues are not enough. That's the first thing we have to know. Secondly, is our debt servicing cost continues to gallop. Third thing is that we are not even slowing down in any level of fiscal consolidation, so our deficit is also on the rise. The last thing also you will notice is things around capital expenditure is still funded, is still put forward heavily, but it's not supposed to be so. The capital expenditure at this point is supposed to be realistic as much as possible. We don't see to have a realistic capital expenditure. In 2025, for example, we have, the Q1 and the Q2 budget implementation report was released, I think, last night. So maybe possibly we just now can see a glimpse of what 2025 look like. But one thing you would say is that we are using 2025 revenue to fund 2024 capex, even up to even 2023 capex. That normally is something that federal government has to put a stop to. The capital expenditure of the federal government should be well targeted. It should be well targeted for the impact that the citizens want to see. This scattergun capital expenditure where you put street lights, put poles, you try to be like as if you're trying to run what I call the federal local government of Nigeria needs to stop. We need to focus. The federal government needs to be more disciplined on its capex side. But every other thing looks relatively good. It just means this tax thing is important. It means our non-revenue drive is enough. Because I look at the 2024 numbers. Almost every target you give to IRS, they are meeting it. And I'm asking myself, I'm giving them, everybody's meeting their targets. Maybe the targets are not aggressive enough. Possibly maybe the federal government needs to get more aggressive with their FIRS and squeeze every form of efficiency out of those spaces, because it's all just very key. Because let's look at the math. I have 15 trillion to pay for debt servicing costs. I have 10 trillion to pay for personnel costs. So definitely I've spent 25 trillion already.
Yeah.
So I still have to pay statutory transfers. I still have to pay overheads. And I'm not even put a dime for capital expenditure. And my revenues, and there's no magic to revenue growth. It's a step-by-step process. And so for my revenue, even at 30 trillion, I do not even have enough to even be able to put down a school or a road or hospital at the capex side. And let's not forget, capex also includes the cars. It also includes, the laptops and different administrative items that states continue and the federal government continues to buy. So there has to be some capital funding discipline before these budgets can begin to make a lot of meaning to Nigerians.
Let's look at the assumptions. For me, I think they are conservative enough. We are looking at crude oil price of about $60-something, I guess. Projection of 1.8 million barrels, including condensate and all of it. Some say that is feasible. What do you make of our assumptions around this spending plan?
Well, decent assumptions, but I would have preferred it to be a bit more conservative. But I know it's also these assumptions are part of the deficit management plan, because if your assumptions are too conservative, it means that your revenue is less. It means that your deficit is much more higher. But in my own view, I look at the assumptions and I say $64 per barrel. Yeah. That seems a little bit too high. The Senate, even when they were reviewing the MTEP, said they should bring down the projected oil production, the oil price benchmark to $60 per barrel. Because we do not know. It seems Russia and Ukraine are fatigued with the current war, so obviously there might be some form of opportunity in the horizon for peace, and that's going to rock the energy market a little bit. And also Iran is also bringing new oil on stream. It's beginning to find ways around reducing the blockages that the US has forced on it. So in some way, the $60 per barrel should have been a much more reasonable thing. The exchange rate at 1,400, well, that's where, if you take a look at the average over the last 6 years, 6 months to 1 year, that's where we have been. So that might be realistic. I would be looking forward to even what are the benchmarks, and that's why the detailing for this budget is important. What are the benchmarks for CIT? What are the benchmarks for VAT? What are the benchmarks for customs? What are the benchmarks for independent revenue? Those are the things that you want to say also to say, are we aggressive enough in terms of the revenue assumption that we have made, especially on the non-oil side? Yeah.
Well, looking ahead, because for me, I think it's time to move ahead. We've seen some pretty figures. Inflation is wrapping up the year at about 14.5%. We've also seen our GDP figures not looking bad. And a series of projections for 2026. Bismarck Rewani specifically says 2026 should be a year of serious boom for Nigeria. Mr. Onigbinde, I'd like to get your views. Yes, I'm catching that smile. But I like your views really for 2026. It's like many say the storm seems to be over and it's time to, start to get into that point of, for me, inclusive growth.
Yeah, I think we are getting there from the macroeconomic balance. And I guess maybe 2026, if there's fidelity to those things, and fidelity means we focus on the removal of fuel subsidy, irrespective of the political pressure. Let's not forget 2026 is a pre-election year, so decisions become much more heavily politicized. So if there's fidelity to the ideas, two ideas, fuel subsidy removal and the fact that the exchange rate must seek parity in the exchange rate market. If those two things happen, I feel like, yes, we've created some sort of stabilization. Obviously, the CBN will do more intervention in 2026 because the government would not want, an exchange rate that goes out of line, because that begins to have much more inflationary pressures on the country. So you will begin to see more federal government intervention, maybe CBN intervention in the exchange rate market, just to maybe to keep it more stable. The federal government also wants to spend a whole lot, so that spending maybe to ramp up, and they can put point and say we did this, we did this, we did that. Might also, we have a lot of spending from debt. I mean, there's also an explosion of the debt market, so more bonds, more treasury bills. I'm also watching how much fidelity they are going to have to not going to the CBN for the ways and means. And the only reason why you would have that fidelity is if you have budget discipline. As long as you don't have budget discipline, you are going to have, and you do not, and you over project your revenue, and you still want to be able to deliver at the scale that you promised. You do not have a choice. Either you are taking from the capital, from the bond market, or you start asking the CBN to provide some form of support to you. And those are the questions that will come, that will be brought forward, as we begin to look at this. So those are the hard questions that the federal government must ask itself. The fidelity to the reforms that we said we want to do. Fiscal discipline, which is what we are talking about with the budget, to focus on what actually matters to Nigerians. And finally, social protection support. Nigerians are still reeling from the current effect of the reforms that the federal government had put forward. How do you do more work to protect them? But in my own view, boom is how we define it. Because a lot of people, when they talk about boom, they're looking at the exchange, the stock market. Stock market since 2023 has been growing in leaps and in bounds. There's been a lot of market correction. So that could incentivize people to say, okay, there's boom coming. But let's not just put boom in that basket alone. Let's ask ourselves, how much FDI would Nigeria bring in 2026? What does that outlook look like? Let's ask ourselves, boom, how much non-oil export growth would Nigeria drive in 2026? What are the processes to make sure that we are engineering that? How much capital projects are we going to deliver in 2026 so that is well targeted and focused on growth? And what is the role of state in all of this, so that some of this support begins to trickle down to the downline? So those are how I would define boom. Because I know when Nigerians sees the ASI or the stock market just jumping up, yes,
that seems to be like the boom. We have just 2 minutes to go. I don't know what sense we can make of this, but you mentioned the tax laws, which was what I started with extensively on the show today. I'd like a word from you also on that, what you expect as we move in 2026.
I mean, we have to take the bullet and learn, and I want us to take 2026 as the year of learning, because there will be teething issues with this tax. Also, let's apply a bit of grace to the government and to those who are trying to push this. And let's stay on the information. Let's not do a lot of misinformation. I mean, there's a lot of apprehension around because of these tax laws. But please, I don't think many things have been introduced. It's just for us to have a little bit more discipline and a little bit more accounting. Because there's no society. It's because of this oil madness that we grew up with. A functional society is run on taxes. I mean, put it anywhere. Nobody anywhere apart from what loves paying taxes. But the government also has to do its own part. Trust and accountability. If you're trying to take more from the people, you need to be more transparent with them. You need to be more efficient with them. And you also need to ensure that you are building trust and open level communication with them. But these tax laws, I know they are pushed back currently around the the fact that the gazetted copy and the amount one that was harmonized, there's a gulf of difference. It's fine for citizens to bring inquiries like that. Let's not shut it down. And I'm happy that the Speaker of the House has set up a committee to look into that. If there are errors with the gazetted copy, let the revised budget, the revised tax law be brought forward and reviewed. But for us to say we want to stall all of that work, I don't think we should do. It is now left for the Citizen and National Assembly to bring all of those gaps together. And maybe in another 3 months, we have another revised tax law that we can bring forward.
Mr. Sheon Igbinde, thank you so much, Director, Co-founder, Budget Nigeria. Well, I think our next conversation will likely be in 2026, but all the same, let me wish you a Happy New Year. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year in advance. Thank you so very much.
Have a wonderful.
All right, you too. Bye-bye. Bye. All right, finally, before we go,